Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with the Texas Gun Vault Poll Question of the Week, a weekly vlog that I put out where I ask you, as my viewers and subscribers, about something that deals with guns, gun politics, current events, the news, or something fun like EDC that I want to get your thoughts and opinions on. And I think more than any other poll question I have put out on this channel, this one deals with the true core meaning of the Second Amendment, and that is self-defense and self-preservation. Yeah, we all have these ancillary things about guns that we like. I like to collect. Maybe you're a competition shooter. Some of you are probably hunters. But what is the core right of the Second Amendment? Why is it there? Why did our founders codify this in law and in our Bill of Rights? Because they understood the natural right of self-defense, self-preservation, not only to defend yourself, but enemies foreign and domestic. Now, while the exact topic of this poll does not deal with the United States specifically, the Second Amendment and that core right, I believe, is a universal right, as I think a lot of you also agree with that sentiment. And so today we're going to be talking about Israel and what happened with the attack from Hamas on innocent civilians. And what lessons can we learn here? And more importantly, what lessons can the Israelis learn? Now, when I was growing up, I was always told that Israel was one of the most armed countries in the world. After all, they are surrounded by people and nations that hate them, that want to obliterate them and drive them into the sea. I was under the understanding that gun ownership and private gun ownership was very high in Israel. Yeah, I knew they probably had licensing restrictions and different guns that they're allowed to own or not own, because we even see that here in the United States. But for the most part, I thought Israel was pretty much tooled up because they knew at any day they could be invaded for any reason by many nations that can easily overpower them. And then what happened this past couple of weeks really surprised me. Well, Hamas, these inhumane animals, attacked unarmed civilians. And then we find out that these people were completely unarmed. They couldn't protect themselves. They were caught off guard. And then, like many of us that are Second Amendment supporters say, well, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. But in this case, the police never came. The military never came, because when they were being attacked, these people that were in the military and were part of the police force, well, they're going to go home and protect their families. They're not going to come and protect you. That's not what they're there for. They were woefully unprepared. They underestimated their enemy. They thought it couldn't happen to them because it hasn't happened in so long. And while my heart goes out to these people and these families that were affected by this attack, I think that this was inevitable. We all saw this coming because history, while it does not repeat, it rhymes. Things are going to happen in cycles over and over again. The lessons that are learned by one generation are taught to the next. And then as each successive generation goes on, if you don't have to fight, let's say like a major world war, or have to go through a Great Depression, you forget those lessons over time because now you have abundance and safety. But inevitably, something bad is going to happen. We're going to have a war again. There is going to be a world conflict. There will be a Great Depression once again. Not because we don't want it to be, but because it's inevitable. It is human nature. It is the cycle of what we do. Our existence is full of these things. And it's really easy to think that, man, we are smarter than the past generation. It's not going to happen to us. We've learned those lessons. And what we don't understand is that we're actually not learning those lessons. We forget. And I have a feeling that the nation of Israel has to learn this lesson again. Maybe at one point they did have a high private firearms ownership rate, but today they don't, because over time they believe the anti-gun myth. The police will be there to protect you. The defense force, the army, will be there to protect you. This can't happen because now we have modern diplomacy. So give up your guns. Guns are bad. You'll never need them. You're more likely to shoot yourself than ever have to defend your home against a home invader or insurgents that are coming to kill you and your family. It's just too dangerous. Give it up. Give that power to the government. And where did that leave these people in Israel? Well, unfortunately, so many passed away. And not just died because of gunfire, but died in horrific ways from torture and rape and mutilations and beheadings. It's absolutely insane. But this was inevitable. It was going to happen. And I think so many anti-gun myths are disproven here. All these things the anti-gunners say, well, you know, if you don't have gun shows, you don't have a gun show loophole, there's no way bad guys can get guns. Come on. How many gun shows are there in Hamas and in the Gaza Strip? Well, there are none. So where'd they get all these guns? Is Colt and L&T and Daniel Defense, do they have contracts with Hamas in the Gaza Strip? Are there gun stores? Are there gun show loopholes? No, because there's no gun manufacturing there. There's no legal gun importation there. So how'd they get the guns? Because where there's a will, there's a way. They're going to break the law. And we know that these people that want to do harm on other people will always find a way. Well, most of these guns probably were provided to them by us with our failed actions in Afghanistan. When the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan, they left hundreds of thousands of rifles, artillery, and weapons. And guess what we're seeing now? These weapons are turning up in the Gaza Strip. Yeah, where did they think these things were going? One of my favorite things was the military said, well, they can't be used because we removed the firing pins. A firing pin costs $2.99 for an M16. You don't think that they can't manufacture them or buy them through some other way? Yeah, it's the stupidity of it all. It's crazy. This was inevitable. So the bad guys were able to get the guns, and the good people were unarmed. That is the saddest thing about it. And they believe the myths. They believe the anti-gun myths. The government will be there. They'll take care of you. Give up your guns, and we will keep you safe. And it was all proven wrong. Because you and I know the truths of this. We all know human nature. We can look at history and know what has happened. And we all know it will happen again. As I said, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. It won't happen the same way every single time. But we can learn the lessons of the past and apply them to the future. And even though, for example, the odds of your house burning down is probably really low, you still have a fire extinguisher. And you tell your children, when they buy a house, make sure you have a fire extinguisher. Well, we need to be doing the same thing with guns. Yes, the odds of Hamas or another nation invading the United States is very, 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 very slim. It's never zero. And honestly, us having all these guns is probably a huge deterrent. If we didn't have guns here in the United States, even though we're surrounded by two large oceans and have a massive military, we would be a much more inviting target because they know if they could attack us the right way, so many civilians would be unarmed and they could just run roughshod through the United States. Well, this is a lesson Israel is having to learn. And after these attacks, it turns out all of a sudden, magically, the government is like, we have to issue these licenses. We have to get these guns in the hands of civilians. Never again. Well, you've said never again in the past, and you let it happen again because you unarmed your civilians. You disarmed them. You said they don't need guns. And lo and behold, this happens. It's stupidity at its finest. In no way do I blame the victims of this attack. However, they did vote for this. They got what they wanted. It's the same thing that happened in Venezuela a few years ago when there were all those famines down there. We heard horrific stories of people breaking into zoos to eat the animals because they had no food, because socialism failed. But guess who voted for that socialism? Because they were made promises that we're going to take all the money away from these evil capitalist corporations that are giving you jobs because they make way too much money and we're going to give it to you. Well, that never happened. And then the people starved. Well, you got what you voted for because people don't learn their lessons. They can't look at history and go, socialism failed in the USSR. It failed in China. It failed in North Korea. But you know what? We're going to get it right this time. No, No, you're not, because of the human condition and how we do things. You have to learn the lessons of the past. You don't have to like the lessons, but you have to learn the lessons. The last reason I think the Israelis were caught in this situation is because of something called the sunk cost fallacy, which means that once you are already invested in something, even if it is obvious you're going down the wrong path, you will continue to go down the wrong path because you have already invested so much time, energy, and resources believing something. In the world of science, this happens all the time. You might have two competing theories about something that deals with particle physics in the universe, and then an experiment proves that one or the other was correct. Well, the people that were trying to prove the theory that was incorrect will continue to try to prove the incorrect theory because they have spent 15 or 20 years of their life trying to prove it. They can't let it go. Gamblers do this all the time. If they're already $1,000 in the hole and they know this is not going to turn out well, they will continue to sink money into the game because they have so much money already invested. They can't pull out. It's one of those things about human nature. In politics, we do it all the time. When the left, for example, looks at a situation like the southern border of the United States that's extremely porous, and because they're so invested in having open borders, even when their cities are being overrun by illegal aliens and their resources are running out, they will continue to say that open borders is the right way to go because they are so invested in that philosophy. Well, anti-gunners, and especially the Israelis, might do the same thing here because they've been told the lie of the anti-gunners for so long, and they've sunk so much money, effort, and political capital into the anti-gun regime that even now, in the face of the obvious, they won't let it go. It's the sunk cost fallacy. But we're going to find out what's going to happen to them in the future. And that's what this poll is about. What do you think is actually going to happen in Israel? Are they going to learn their lesson? Or are they just going to go back and do the same old thing that they've always done? So with all of that said, let's dive right into this week's poll question, and then we'll get your results. This past week, we saw the surprise, horrific, and gruesome attacks by Hamas on unarmed civilians in Israel. As the attack unfolded, it became clear that the military and police were unprepared and unable to protect the civilians who needed them the most. This scenario is exactly what many pro-gun people have been preparing for and warning others about, that someday this might happen to them. This caught the unprepared people in Israel who lived under strict gun control off guard. Do you think this attack will be a wake-up call for the Israeli people, and will we see a reversal of the gradual gun control culture there? And this gun control culture that I'm talking about has happened slowly over time, because probably the youngest generation in Israel now, the ones that currently can vote, well, they haven't really had to face conflict like their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents. They've lived in relative safety. The government has always been there to protect them. They haven't really had to fight a major war in a long time. So over time, they're thinking, it can't happen to us, and you forget the lessons of the past. But now they're faced with this. Are they going to look at history and say, it's time for a change? Or are they going to remain ignorant and think it still can't happen to us? This is a one-time thing. Well, let's see what you guys had to say with this week's results. With only 55 votes this week, probably the lowest of any poll, and really surprising me because I thought this one was going to be a really popular poll because a lot of people have opinions on it. We start out with, yes, more Israelis will tool up and they will say never again. 18%. Yes, but you will only see a small or temporary changes to the law. 47%. Neutral. Nothing will change and will not learn from the past. 22%. No, they will pass more gun control thinking that is the answer. 9%. And something else, explain in the comments. 4%. And unsurprisingly, the largest amount of votes went to the one that says it's going to be a temporary change, because that's the way politics work. Whenever something happens, there has to be an immediate reaction as fast as possible, and then as time goes on, we just forget about it. I mean, I remember life before 9/11. I think a lot of you guys do as well, but I'm a teacher, and now I teach a lot of students that have no concept of life before 9/11. They don't know what it was like and how much that changed. And what happened after 9/11? Well, now we have security theater at our airports that does absolutely nothing, but it makes people feel safe, but doesn't actually do anything about making them safe. So we see this happen all the time. It's like when a school bus gets hit by a train. Well, what do? Well, they're going to put that little blinking light on the back of the bus, because now the bus is going to be way more safe because it has that blinking light because everybody can see it. Well, they did something. Well, that's probably what's going to happen, and a large majority of you thought the same thing. But let's go through each one of these, and I'll give you guys my personal thoughts and opinions. First, we have, yes, more Israelis will tool up, and they will say never again. Well, inevitably, I think there is going to be a decent amount of Israelis that are going to look at this and realize, yeah, it's time. We didn't see this coming. I'm scared for my life and my family's life. It's time to tool up. And who knows, even if the government does not legally allow people to start to do this, you're probably going to see a huge black market for arms in Israel. People wanting to keep guns on their person and in their homes for this exact reason. I do think that some people's eyes were opened up, but this is probably going to be the older generation, the people that actually have had to fight these wars in the past and deal with these conflicts. The younger generation might not learn this lesson. Then we have, yes, but you only see small or temporary changes to the law, and this got the majority, and I actually think this is the way it's going to go. If I was going to vote, this is what's going to be. Like right now, they're going to issue all these licenses and sell all these guns to these civilians. And then probably in about 5 years, when things die down and go away, you're going to get the anti-gun politicians in Israel being like, guns are bad because we are going to have some type of gang shooting or a school shooting or whatever. We had to take them away. And because they have the licenses and the registration, they know where the guns is, they'll pass a law and they'll confiscate them all again because they're like, we'll never be attacked like that again, and they won't learn their lesson. But most likely it's going to be fleeting and very temporary. But right now, it looks like they're going to loosen their gun laws to help the citizens protect themselves. Then we have neutral, nothing will change and will not learn from the past. And this is what I actually think most politicians are going to do in Israel. Most of them are going to think, well, we already got all these laws on the book. We just got to change the way that we police and military, because they want to hold on to hope that being anti-gun and making sure the consolidation of power and the monopoly of violence is with the state is the way to go. I actually think that most people in power are going to try to do that because they want to be the solution. They don't want the people to be their own solution. You know, one of the things that I think every politician wants, and what drives the people to want to stay in power, is to be famous, to be historical, to go down in history as the one that did whatever it is. Because after all, if you're a president of a country or a prime minister and the people don't need you to defend them, well, you're not very important. But if everyone's livelihood is contingent upon you defending them and coming in and being the great hero, well, that makes you feel good. You're going to go down in history as the next George Washington. Well, politicians don't want you to be able to defend yourself because now you don't need them. Politicians want to be needed, and I think most politicians would have voted for neutral. Then we have no, they will pass more gun control, thinking that is the answer. And of course, that's what the anti-gunners will always do, even in the face of their worst enemies coming in and beheading babies and killing innocent civilians and torturing them with guns, machine guns that were given to them most likely by the United States. Their answer is, well, if we just pass more gun control, if we have more background checks, the bad guys won't get their guns. There's no background check system in Gaza. There's no way that any gun control that could be passed in Israel is going to stop the people from Gaza and the Palestinians from getting these arms. We all know that because they're bad guys. They're going to want to do evil things because that's what evil people do, and they're not going to be deterred by a law. But there's still going to be the anti-gunners out there that, because of the sunk cost fallacy, will continue to push more and more gun control, and you guys know it. And then we have something else, explain in the comments, and it only got 4%, and I think most people that were voting for this were saying, well, there's going to be temporary measures in the future, but in the end, the anti-gunners are going to make their grand push again, saying, we need to ban assault weapons, we need to do all these things, which of course we know is not going to work, so it's just going to be kind of a mixture of all of those other options. And so that's what I have to say about this and what I think about all this, but now let's see what you guys had to say with the top-rated comments of the week. And the top-rated comment of the week comes from Paul K003, who said, I grew up in the 1980s. I constantly heard the stories of the Israelis being so pro-gun. I even saw stories on 60 Minutes talking about how the people there carried pistols because of suicide bombers and terrorist attacks. It is sad and foolish to let your rights be whittled away knowing that you are surrounded by that many groups that hate you. They became complacent and sadly paid a dear price. This is why we have to remain vigilant and remember that no one will come to save you, and you should be prepared to save yourself. And I understand why that is the top-rated comment of the week, because I agree wholeheartedly. The one thing I always tell people is that when something major happens and the police are supposed to come protect you, well, they're probably going to go home and protect their family. What was going on in Israel when they knew there was going to be a huge attack? Well, they're not going to come protect you because their family is more important to them than you. So they're going to take their guns and go home. And they're not going to come to protect you. You need to protect yourself. And that is the great lesson. You cannot rely on others. You cannot rely on the government. It's a lesson that has to be learned the hard way over and over again. Then we have Litzine Zoots, who says, I am optimistic that correct thinking will prevail, and they will come to understand that for everyone's safety, all should be armed. Ukraine had a similar wake-up call. I am not as hopeful for the USA because so many think such could never happen here. Too many take our safety for granted. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those that do learn are historically doomed to watch the non-learners repeat history unless learners can be prepared enough. It's like herd immunity. If enough of us are armed, when the balloon goes up, then maybe we can compensate for the rest of the population that hasn't learned by them. And yes, I completely agree. You know, it's the whole thing about being the sheepdog. In our society, there are people that are sheep, and there are people that are the sheepdog. I know that there are a lot of great people in our country. I know there's a lot of people that would defend not only their family, but their community if something like what happened in Israel happened here. Not because they have to or they're being paid, but because they feel like it is their duty as human beings to their fellow citizens. That's what they would do, and that call is strong for a lot of people, but you can only do that if you are armed. Then we have Rufus Rizzo, 78, who says, from what I see, Israel is rapidly changing. I think they will develop more of a pro-2A type nation. Well, you would think that after World War II and all of the wars that they fought in the past, that they would do that as well. I honestly think history is going to repeat itself. I do think in the short term, they're going to become very much more pro-2A, even though they're not going to have a Second Amendment. They're going to be more pro-gun. I think those lessons will be lost in 1 or even 2 generations. Then we have Sonic357, who says, with all that's going on in the Ukraine and now Israel, lessons should be learned and changes should be made. On the other hand, the U.S. needs to wake up. We are sending aid to others as we disarm our own country, setting ourselves up for possibly the same failures. That's just my opinion, and I completely agree. Why are we sending arms and money and training to other countries, and in some cases, countries that don't like us, but yet we disarm ourselves? You know, we're sending guns to Ukraine, guns to Israel, so they can defend themselves. Well, we wouldn't have to be doing that if they were allowed to arm themselves up. And it's a lot of times because the politicians here think that we're different, that we're better. Everybody thinks that they're not going to make the same mistakes of the past. The same things that affected the Roman Empire, the same corruption, the abuse of power that happened back then, the desire for politicians to be rich, powerful, and influential are the same drives that affect politicians today. We are no different than the ancient Romans, but we think we are because we live in the 21st century. And that's a huge detriment because we don't learn the lessons of the past. And then finally, we have Ted Baxter 5234 who said, just a life observation and maybe not an accurate one. I don't think much will change with their laws. The laws as they were the day of the attack were generally supported by the factions that comprise contemporary Israel. Why? Well, it makes no sense to me. I thought their people were awash with defensive weapons, but that turns out not to be the case. Israel, regardless of the influences of right or left, their government, their population, is much more to the left than the government population of the U.S. It seems odd that a people of their history would be more center or center-right. Yet I see so many Jews that are leftist bomb throwers, so to speak. It's just an observation. Not sure if it's accurate, but it seems like it is from decades of observation. I hope Israel will begin to be responsible to their people. I mean, if it is not a government that protects its people, what is it really? Well, exactly. That's the main role of government, right? To protect the borders, to protect the people from invasion and enemies, foreign and domestic. And obviously Israel dropped the ball here. But to answer the question, I think what happens is over time, everybody wants to be smarter than the generation that came before. They want to be more sophisticated. And of course, Israel is prone to the same influences that affect Europe and the United States. They look at the world today, they see the news, they're on the internet, and they see all these enlightened people in Europe saying, you don't need guns, we're going to be there to protect you. We all know it's a lie, we all know it's a facade, but they believe the lies because they want to be part of the thing. Yeah, and then there's the sunk cost fallacy. They're so invested in anti-gun propaganda that even in the face of the obvious, they have to continue with the anti-gun agenda because they're so invested in it. Because if they back off and change their mind, well, in their minds, they would rather be dead than be proven that they were wrong for all those years. And it's really, really sad. But that's just human nature. And these people voted for this. I'm not saying they got what they deserved, but it was brought on them by the way that they voted and what they allowed their politicians to do. And it's a sad story, and I hope that they learn their lesson. My fingers are crossed. So that is the Texas Gun Vault poll question of the week. I thought I would get more responses and more votes because the topic is so important to the core right of the Second Amendment. But that's what I thought and what you guys thought, and it was really enlightening and very interesting. So if you guys want to participate in next week's poll, please go to the community tab of my YouTube channel. I will post a link in the description as well as a pinned comment. Please go over there and see what the poll is about. Make sure to vote and comment and like other people's comments so we can get the top rated comments of the week. So what do you guys think? Is Israel going to learn their lesson? And could we as Americans learn a lesson from what's going on around the world? It's better to learn from mistakes and the mistakes of others so you don't have to suffer like them. But will we? Well, that's up for debate and only time will tell. So, as always, thanks for watching.